Hi everyone, Petrik and Choco Boy. Well, both of us are here today. We will be giving the reading guide to John Gwynne's books, right? Of course, it's right. Yeah, but for today's video, as I said, we'll be talking about John Gwynne's books. John Gwynne, his books has always been one of my favorite books ever since the year 2017. And after I gave my reading guide regarding where to start and also my overall thoughts regarding his books, why you should read them, I will give my personal ranking toward each book that has been published by John Gwynne because I have read everything published by him. I think so far, right now, he has published 9 novels, with the 10th novel, The Fury of the Gods, coming this year. And you know, because John Gwynne's books are some of my favorite books, well, it has been a while since I talk about his books outside of SFF Spotlight, and I'm going to use today's video as an opportunity for me to talk about them, especially with the recent release and sold out of Malice Grim Oak Press Edition, and also the upcoming release of The Fury of the Gods, the third and the final book in the Bloodstone saga. But yeah, let's get started. First, regarding reading guide. So far, John Gwynne has 3 first books in the series. That's Malice, the first book in the Faithful and the Fallen, and then A Time of Dread, the first book in Of Blood and Bone trilogy, and finally The Shadow of the Gods, which is the first book in the Bloodstone saga. Now, some readers have been asking me which books should they start with. Now, although there are 3 books as the first book in the series, the option really, in my opinion, there are only 2 options. It's either Malice or Shadow of the Gods. And these 2 series, they are completely separated from one another. I cannot recommend A Time of Dread, even though, I mean, technically you can definitely read that as the first book in Of Blood and Bone trilogy, but at the same time, one of the main benefits of reading A Time of Dread is only after you have read the entire Faithful and the Fallen series. So because of that, I can only recommend Malice and The Shadow of the Gods as the best starting point for John Gwynne's books. Okay, I think Choco is really bored here, so I'm going to let him sleep first, okay? Okay, Choco is going to sleep. And yeah, back to my point, there are only 2 options, Malice or The Shadow of the Gods. And there are quite big differences when it comes to Malice and The Shadow of the Gods. Malice is John Gwynne's debut novel. It was published in the year 2012, and technically, it is probably his weakest book when it comes to the matter of writing. But at the same time, there is something special about Malice, in my opinion. The characters and also the classic fantasy style to it. There is just something that is so charming about Malice, even though technically, as I said, it is not as well written as all of his other books. So if you are more in the mood of a classic epic fantasy that is told in a more modern writing style, like David Gamble's writing style, then I think you should try reading Malice instead of The Shadow of the Gods. But as I said, these 2 are different series. You can just start from any of these 2. But if you want a Norse mythology-inspired epic fantasy series, then try Bloodstone Saga. And compared to Malice, the Bloodstone Saga, the first book at least, contained only 3 main POV characters. Malice, on the other hand, contain a lot of POV characters. So if you are not used to epic fantasy, even though John Gwynne's writing style has always been accessible and easy to read, they are so vivid as well. But at the same time, if you are not used to epic fantasy, large cast of characters and many names, most of the time similar characters' names, then I think Malice will be quite challenging, especially the first half of Malice. When I was reading Malice for the first time, it was in the year, I think, 2017. Yeah, it has been 7 years since I read Malice. Wow. Wow, it has been that long. But yeah, it has been 7 years, and I remember very clearly that I struggled a bit as well when I was reading Malice. It was quite difficult for me to remember who is who, and also there was a bit of a lack of description in the characters that John Gwynne put in Malice. It gets better with each book, but Malice was a bit of a difficulty in the first half of the novel. This kind of issue is not evident in The Shadow of the Gods, in my opinion. The Shadow of the Gods was so much easier to get into, and as far as first book of a series goes, it is the best first book of a series written by John Gwynne. So when it comes to the matter of reading guide, that is it. You don't have to confuse yourself anymore. I get questions asking whether I should start from Malice or A Time of Dread or The Shadow of the Gods. As I said, the options only 2. Start from Malice or The Shadow of the Gods. And John Gwynne's books are really suitable to those who love reading action sequence very well written action sequence, because John Gwynne is one of the masters when it comes to writing close quarter combat scenes. Very few authors can write a close quarter combat scenes, realistic one, as good as John Gwynne. John Gwynne in his personal life is also a reenactor, and I think it plays a lot of part into why he is so good at writing close quarter combat scenes. And on top of that, he's also really good at writing characters and animal companions. That's really a huge part of why I love John Gwynne's books. Now, writing style, and then I will talk about a ranking. The writing style of John Gwynne, the vocabulary use is quite simple. It is not difficult. There is nothing purplish about his prose. If you're going to read John Gwynne's books, do not expect like absolutely beautiful writing style. That is not John Gwynne's writing style. But his writing style is vivid. It is easy to read. It is meant to immerse you into the story without feeling distracted, for the lack of better word, by the writing style. Sometimes I know readers want to read a beautiful prose, and that's not what you're going to get from reading John Gwynne's books. Personally, I love a beautiful writing style like a purple prose, and also accessible writing style like John Gwynne's or Brandon Sanderson. It all depends on my reading mood. So that's really my reading guide when it comes to reading John Gwynne's books. It is that simple. Once again, just start from Malice or The Shadow of the Gods. Now let's talk about my personal ranking toward the 9 books that are published by John Gwynne so far. This is based on my first time reading through the series. I haven't done the second read of Bloodsworn Saga, so this ranking will probably change after I do a second read of the Bloodsworn Saga this year, as I anticipate the release of The Fury of the Gods in October 2024. Let's begin the ranking, and just as a reminder, and this is an important reminder, I love all of John Gwynne's books. This is just a matter of choosing favorites, and it is not really easy for me to decide which one triumph over which, but I think for now I will have to settle with this ranking. So let's start at the number 9 spot. And this will come as an unpopular opinion, because at the number 9 spot, I have The Hunger of the Gods. This is the second and the middle book in the Bloodsworn Saga trilogy, and I think many people actually consider this to be one of the best books by John Gwynne. And as I said, I love all of John Gwynne's books, but I think because I'm quite used to reading all of John Gwynne's books by the time I was reading The Hunger of the Gods, I think the surprises in The Hunger of the Gods felt a bit lacking to me. But at the same time, the writing style, the actions and the characterizations are all still on point, and I still love The Hunger of the Gods. And it needs to be remembered that when I was reading The Hunger of the Gods, unlike usual, I did not binge through the series. Usually when I'm reading John Gwynne's books, I always binge read through his books, whether it's the Faithful and the Fallen or Blood and Bone trilogy. I always binge read his books. Well, in the case of Blood and Bone trilogy, I did not binge read through that, but at the same time, my recollection and also my remembrance of each book in the trilogy was still very clear when I dive into the sequel. But it was not the same case when it comes to The Hunger of the Gods, even though there is a detailed summary of The Shadow of the Gods in the beginning of this book. But at the same time, I did struggle a bit at remembering who is who, and also some of the key events in The Shadow of the Gods. And I think that kind of reflected toward why I think The Hunger of the Gods is my least favorite book by John Gwynne so far. But still, despite that, I still gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars rating. So yeah, even though this is the lowest rated book of John Gwynne's books, for me, this is still a 4.5 out of 5 stars rating. And moving on to ranking number 8, we have Malice. This is the first book in The Faithful and the Fallen, and also John Gwynne's debut novel. As I said, this was published in the year 2012, and as I mentioned earlier, the writing style here, the writing technicality is not as good as all of John Gwynne's other books, but I just love reading the characters in the Banished Land saga, especially in The Faithful and the Fallen. And because this is the beginning of Korban, Makin, Gar, Castel, Veradis, and so many other characters in The Faithful and the Fallen, this book kind of means a lot to me. When I was reading Malice, even though I struggled a bit with the first half of Malice, but I still overall love the entirety of Malice. This is a great first book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. And if you love classic epic fantasy with all those tropes like Chosen One and also prophecies, unlikely hero or fanboy trying to become a hero, then I think you will really like Malice. But as I said, you just have to be a bit patient in the first half of the novel. Malice gets so much better in the second half, especially in the ending. And I think, as I always say, whether you will end up loving this series or not, it all depends on your enjoyment of the second book, Valor, which I will talk about later. But at the number 7 spot, we have A Time of Dread by John Gwynne. If Malice was the first book in The Faithful and the Fallen, A Time of Dread was the first book in Of Blood and Bone trilogy. And Of Blood and Bone trilogy is the sequel series to The Faithful and the Fallen. And this is why I always recommend, please read The Faithful and the Fallen first before you dive into Of Blood and Bone trilogy. And A Time of Dread, as I said earlier, you will benefit a lot from reading The Faithful and the Fallen first, because a lot of my enjoyment of reading A Time of Dread was improved because I have read The Faithful and the Fallen. My connection with the characters of The Faithful and the Fallen matters a lot to my enjoyment of the entire Of Blood and Bone trilogy. This isn't to say that the new characters are mediocre or lacking, but if you have read the Banished Land saga, I think many fans will concur that there is something special about the cast of characters in The Faithful and the Fallen, and that matters a lot in influencing my enjoyment of A Time of Dread and also its sequel, A Time of Blood, which is at the number 6 spot. Ta-da! A Time of Blood is the second book in Of Blood and Bone trilogy. So when it comes to the matter of comparison, I don't think overall that Of Blood and Bone trilogy is as good as The Faithful and the Fallen. I think this is also because Of Blood and Bone trilogy is actually shorter compared to The Faithful and the Fallen. Each book here is only about 400 pages long, unlike the 600 to 700 pages long in each book in The Faithful and the Fallen. This one is 480 pages. A Time of Courage is the exception. That one is still huge, just like The Faithful and the Fallen books. But this one is very action-packed. If you love A Time of Dread and you have fallen in love with the characters in A Time of Dread, then this one will definitely shine for you as well. And I think A Time of Dread and also A Time of Blood is when the horror stuff is starting to appear in the Banished Land saga much more than it did in The Faithful and the Fallen, which I did not feel there is too much horror elements, but the horror elements are definitely prevalent in A Time of Dread and A Time of Blood. And this is not saying that this one is grimdark, just saying that A Time of Dread and A Time of Blood is darker in tone compared to The Faithful and the Fallen. But yeah, and then at the number 6 spot, at the number 5 spot, we have The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is technically, as I said, the best first book in the series by John Gwynne so far, and this is the first book in the Blood Swan saga. The 3 main characters, Orca, Varg, and also Elvar. Although Elvar's story did take some time for me to get used to, but after a while, I felt invested in her story as well. The 3 main characters end up being super likable, which is not a surprise. This is John Gwynne. He is always really good when it comes to the matter of writing characters. And Orca, well, she is one of the best characters of all time, in my opinion. This is a revenge story as well. And also, if you love Norse mythology, nothing else needs to be said. You have to try reading the Blood Swan saga. And The Shadow of the Gods is, for now, the best first book in the series by John Gwynne, even though I still felt a bit more biased toward Malice because of the characters in The Faithful and the Fallen. But technically, this is the best first book in the series by John Gwynne. We still have 4 more books here. So at the number 4 spot, I have Valor by John Gwynne. This is the second book in The Faithful and the Fallen. And this is where I always say, if Valor did not click for you, just give up reading The Faithful and the Fallen. It is that simple, because I do not think the rest of the series will click for you as well. This is an action-packed sequel to Malice, the first book in The Faithful and the Fallen. This one is very action-oriented. After John Gwynne took his time to develop the characters in Malice, to introduce and develop the characters, this is where John Gwynne put the action and push the story further. And as I said, John Gwynne is really one of the best when it comes to writing characters and also close-quarter combat scenes. And the pacing in Valor is unstoppable. It is really good. And from reading this, I couldn't stop binge reading through the series. It was so good. And at the number 3 spot, of course, I have many fans of John Gwynne's favorite, and it is Ruin, the third and the penultimate installment in The Faithful and the Fallen. I know that when it comes to the matter of prophecy and then classic fantasy tropes, many people always say that it meant that the story is predictable, but there are plenty of surprises, and Ruin proved that for me. I'm not surprised why so many people chose Ruin as their favorite book by John Gwynne. It is really an excellent book, and if it weren't because the next two books I'm going to mention were better and stronger as a installment, in my opinion, well, of course I would have chosen Ruin as the best one. But personally speaking, even though Ruin is already an amazing book with devastating events, but I have to choose John Gwynne's final book in the series as the best two books written by John Gwynne so far. So at the number 2 spot, I have A Time of Courage. This is the third book in Of Blood and Bone trilogy, and it is also, for now, the conclusion to the Banished Land saga, consisting of The Faithful and the Fallen and also of Blood and Bone trilogy. When I thought that things couldn't get more epic after reading through Rat, the final book in The Faithful and the Fallen quartet, I was wrong. The final book in A Time of Courage is really more epic in scope, and also up until now it is the most epic battle sequence written by John Gwynne, at least until the release of The Fury of the Gods, which I haven't read. I am still waiting for that book to be released in the month of October, but once I have the advanced reading copy of that, I will definitely be reading The Fury of the Gods immediately. But back to my point, A Time of Courage, for now, in my opinion, is the second best book written by John Gwynne. On top of having such an epic final battle to the Banished Land saga, there were some events in A Time of Courage that talk about the characters in The Faithful and the Fallen, and without spoilers, they were incredibly emotional and impactful for me. As I said, the characters in The Faithful and the Fallen are real to me. They are just like real friends to me now. And so, at the number 1 spot, the best book written by John Gwynne so far, for me, it will have to be Rat, the fourth and the final book in The Faithful and the Fallen. Although the scope of the final battle in A Time of Courage is bigger and more epic compared to Rat, but Rat is not inferior when it comes to the matter of quality. I love everything about Rat. This is an amazing final book to a series. This is the book that made me truly a die-hard John Gwynne fan. I love everything about Rat. It is what I wanted from the final book of a series. A big decision, and although some were predictable, it doesn't matter. It was still very satisfying to witness some of the events that occurred, and also devastating and emotional as well. And from my perspective, the epic final battle in the Rat works stronger because I cared so much about the characters in The Faithful and the Fallen. Makin, Gar, Korban, they are all some of my favorite characters of all time. And seeing their story, for better or worse, come to an ending in Rat, well, it was just so impactful to me. I love Rat. It is the best book by John Gwynne so far. And I think from the top 2 that I talk about right now, I think you will know that I love John Gwynne's books the most when he's writing the final book in the series. A Time of Courage, Rat. And that's why I'm incredibly excited about the release of The Fury of the Gods. I don't know, maybe there is a possibility that The Fury of the Gods will be the best book written by John Gwynne so far in his career. And I will find out later this year. But for now, this is it. This is my ranking on John Gwynne's books, on all the 9 books published by John Gwynne so far. And also this is the end of my reading guide and my ranking video. Honestly, it's just so fun for me, and also I always enjoy talking about John Gwynne's books. When I get messages of people starting to read John Gwynne's books or any other books really because of my reviews, I'm always delighted. That's really why I write and post reviews on Goodreads and also on my YouTube channel. I want people to experience the great things that I experience from reading books, and I get that a lot from The Faithful and the Fallen and the other John Gwynne's books, of course. And it goes without saying that John Gwynne's writing and his books, just like every other books in this universe, will not be suitable for everyone. Everything that I said here can be argued against because it all depends on the reader's experience. But for me, John Gwynne's books really click with me, and I love every book that John Gwynne has ever written. And yeah, that's really the end of today's video. Do let me know whether you have read John Gwynne's books or not. Do you love them? And I think that's pretty much it from me today. I'm really looking forward to the release of The Fury of the Gods, and I will do a second read of The Shadow of the Gods and The Hunger of the Gods this year in preparation of The Fury of the Gods. But until then, this is my ranking and my reading guide of John Gwynne's books. So yeah, that's it for me today. As always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. Bye-bye. Lastly, I want to say thank you so much once again to all my patrons who keep on supporting me.